In this episode, the story of one of the most beautiful and popular gorges near Almaty, which actually does not exist. Kazakhstan is a unique country, and not only because of the fact that more than 100 nationalities live here, peace and harmony, and it occupies the 9th place in the world in terms of territory, but also because it is located in several geographical areas, from dense forests to steppes and deserts. A special pearl of Kazakhstani landscapes is the high slopes of the Tien Shan mountains and one of the Zailiysky Alatau ranges. From ancient times, people lived here, next to snow leopards, brown bears, wolves, and other animals. Now it is a favorite vacation spot for citizens and guests of Almaty. There are many paths that tourists walk almost every day, but few of them know what stories keep these stunning slopes. Who and how built houses on the mountain slopes? It means that the village was quite large. What is the actual name of one of the most popular gorges in Almaty Mountains? This question can be answered as follows. Alma-Arasan exists, but the Alma-Arasan Gorge does not exist. How were the soldiers treated in Zailiysky Alatau during the Second World War? The wounded soldiers' food, medical staff, and much more were lifted in a special elevator. The origin of the Big Almaty Lake, the ancient names of geographical places in the Almaty Mountains. What diseases can be cured if you go to the mountains, and many other little-known and interesting stories related to gorges near Almaty. Watch all this and much more right now. The road to the gorges starts from Al-Farabi Avenue up Dulati Street. Nearby is the park of the first president and the river Big Almaty. It is from here that we go to the peaks, which keep many secrets and mysteries. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It is the Time Puzzle, and today we will find out the history of the gorge, which have caused huge amount of controversy lately. There are several ways to get to the foot of the mountains: car, public transport, bicycle, or on foot. However, the last option will take a lot of time. You have to go 14 kilometers uphill. However, it doesn't matter which way you use. Beautiful views await you along the way, a good road, lots of cafes where you can have a bite to eat with various dishes of various cuisines of the world. In general, there are no problems with walking in the mountains for those who are in Almaty. Everything's within easy reach. Historian as well as a lover of hiking in the mountains, Gulmira Bilyalova told us about it.
Окрестности Алматы издавна известны как излюбленное место отдыха не только алматинцев, но и гостей.
The surroundings of Almaty have long been known as a favorite vacation spot not only for Almaty residents but also for guests of Kazakhstan. These are magnificent landscapes, alpine ranges, snow-white ridges of Zailiysky Alatau. The city is located between two large gorges. This is a small Almaty Gorge and a large Almaty Gorge.
Называется трава леса луговой. То есть там растут и леса хвойные, и травы разнотравные.
This landscape is called grass forest meadow. That is, there are coniferous forests and mixed herbs in a very large abundance, especially now in the autumn, lots of shrubs, honeysuckle, raspberry, and it's very beautiful. Literally, the whole gorge glows with such an abundance of sea buckthorn bushes, a very healing sea buckthorn bush.
Кустарника очень целебного.
At the entrance to the gorge, there is an ecological post. The borders of the Zailiysky Alatau State National Natural Park begin here, the area of which is almost 200,000 hectares. Its history begins in 1931, when the Almaty State Reserve was created. All that time, its area was only 15,000 hectares. However, the history of this park and the gorges that are located in it's much older. Archaeologist Alexander Goryachev told us about people who lived here 1,000 years ago.
Само Большое Алматинское ущелье имело условия для проживания, скажем, людей в древности Средневековья не так уж глубоко.
The largest Almaty Gorge had conditions for people to live in early Middle Ages, but not so deep, right down to the lake and bare gorges along the main channel. The most ancient sites of the early Iron Age are marked there. Those are ancient encampments. the topmost sites of pastoralists. But closer to the Alma-Arasan Gorge, in the Big Almaty Gorge, indeed, there was such a rather busy ancient life.
Была такая достаточно кипучая древняя жизнь.
According to archaeologists, the development of this region began in the Bronze Age. The slopes of Zailiysky Alatau were a great place for farming. The main activities of the inhabitants of these places were agriculture and various handicraft production. Ancient people were also engaged in cattle breeding, but this was not yet the main activity, and it was not sedentary and at a small scale.
Был большой поселок, к сожалению, сейчас он полностью застроен.
There was a big village. Unfortunately, now it is fully built up, but its water conduit and auric remained untouched, which stretches for almost a kilometer up to the opening of the Alma-Arasan Gorge, and periodically from this ditch there are branches. Apparently these were gardens, vegetable gardens of people who lived there in the antiquity of the Middle Ages, and they had a watering system. But by the Iron Age, the tribes that lived in Zailiysky Alatau had increased their livestock numbers and needed new pastures. Semi-nomadic cattle breeding appeared, according to which people in summer went up from villages to high mountain plains. Joly. They built their homes and spent the entire warm period of the year there.
В самом начале Алма-Арасанского ущелья имеется несколько серий объектов.
At the very beginning of the Alma-Arasan Gorge, there are several series of objects. First of all, these are settlements. The settlement is quite interesting, characteristic for cattle breeding.
Жители этого поселка вот на одном из боковых ущелий.
The inhabitants of this village, which is on one of the side gorges that adjoin the Alma-Arasan Gorge, literally cut out platforms for their homes.
Примерно так же.
About the same way, by the way, how modern Almaty residents carve out platforms for their summer cottages and even houses on the mountain slopes. Nevertheless, as archaeologists say, such dwellings should not be considered only a place where people lived in the summer. As the excavations showed, these were rather large buildings, and the number of houses that the ancients built was designed for a considerable number of people.
Площадки эти были достаточно покрупнее, потому что на ней должна была вместиться.
These sites were rather large because it was supposed to fit both a dwelling and a household yard with some buildings and a cattle pen, which directly belonged to the inhabitants of this housing construction.
Принадлежал жителям этого дома.
Small houses designed for a small family, 5-6 people, no more.
На малую семью
But there are about 5 to 6 such tiers. It is what we have recorded.
таких ярусов где-то 5-6. То, что мы зафиксировали.
This means that the village was quite large for that time. That is, these are 6 to 8 house buildings.
6-8.
While it's not difficult to calculate, it's such an ordinary modern village.
Несложно посчитать. Ну, это вот такой обычный современный поселок.
Moreover, in addition to the remains of dwellings, the researchers found a quarry nearby where, according to the assumption of archaeologists, stone was mined for the construction of houses. In addition, these settlements were investigated in due time by the chief architect of the city of Verney, the Frenchman Paul Gourdet.
Каменоломня явно средневековая, то есть все техники.
The quarry is clearly medieval, that is, the technology for stone processing there dates back to the Middle Ages. During its existence, this quarry turned at least 2 large rock groups into materials for the construction of dwellings and some public sites or buildings on this large Almaty fort. There are still fragments of chopped, chipped blocks from the rock, fragments of semi-processed boards, not fully processed, and the dwellings of those stonecutters who lived there. Well, and finally, the crown of all this space is a large Almaty Fortification, which is located on the left bank. It's just above the President's Park. In the 50s or 70s of the 20th century, unfortunately, almost everything was destroyed. Paul Gourdet, together with Vasily Bartold, a Russian Orientalist, investigated these mounds in 1893 to 94. In addition to the complex of mounds, they investigated the remains of buildings, which were located higher in the gorge.
Этот крупный царский могильник был расположен вдоль всего левого.
This large royal burial ground was located along the entire left bank, including in the area of the settlement, and the information about it can be found in the early descriptions of Almaty and its environs, primarily by Duplitsky, Gorge, and so on.
Как вы знаете, опять же, в послевоенный период эта территория начала очень...
As you know, again, in the post-war period, this territory began to be built up very actively, and far from all these objects were covered by archaeological research. They were simply demolished.
Просто сносились.
Coming up next, why does Alma-Arasan Gorge really not exist?
Это конечная остановка автобуса. Здесь туристы решают, куда же они
This is the final bus stop. Here, tourists decide where they will go, there to the Big Almaty Lake, or this way, to the gorge, which causes a lot of heated debate. Some argue that its real name is Alma-Arasanskaya, others say that such a gorge simply does not exist. The running tourism coach Vadim Shklar also takes an active part in the discussion.
Вадим Шкляр.
Ну, во-первых, почему нельзя называть, да, вот это
Well, firstly, why not call this whole gorge Alma-Arasan? Because I work a lot with people now, people give slightly wrong locations. A huge number of Almaty residents call everything Alma-Arasan Gorge that goes from the President's Park and up,
и назначают точки, да, друг другу, встречи. Алма-Арасан река.
and make appointments with each other. Alma-Arasan, Kazakhstani River, Alma-Arasan Bears, Alma-Arasan not reaching the lake, and as a result of this, there are inconsistencies, and people get lost, especially those people who do not know other places. And so you can't call it that at all. In addition, a lot of controversy arises not only about the name itself, but also about whether it is a gorge or a mountain area. Many people believe that these words mean the same thing, just synonyms. It's a delusion. Viktor Blagoveshensky, Doctor of Geographical Sciences, told us about the difference between the mountain area and the gorge.
Ну, ущелье, я уже говорил, это узкая долина. Она обычно бывает протяженная, там, ну, километров 10-20.
Well, the gorge, I already said, is a narrow valley. It's usually 10 to 20 kilometers long. We have a large Almaty Gorge, it is 25 kilometers long.
Размером примерно так, ну, может
A mountain area is a section of a territory which is approximately, well, maybe 500 by 500 meters, which somehow separates from another territory, stands out in some way.
его как-то обособить от всего ущелья.
In order to somehow isolate it from the whole gorge, they give it some name, for example, Big Almaty Lake or Zailiysky Izan area, Alma-Arasan Tract. Above it, there is the tract Aloshkin Bridge.
В этом проходной, вот урочище Алма-Арасан, выше там.
That is, this is some piece of territory. It can be of very different shapes, of very different purposes, but different from the rest of the territory.
Самого разного назначения, но отличающиеся от остальной территории.
As a rule, such names are coined by the people. For example, there is a legend that tells why the tract Aloshkin Bridge is called that way. According to it, a guy named Alexei died in this place. Either he slipped and fell into the river or was simply crashed. There is no exact information, but nevertheless, the name has become perpetuated.
Если посмотреть на карту, да, то люди называли все по-простому.
If you look at the map, then people called everything in a simple way. Aksai, left, right, middle. Turgan, small Turgan, large, medium. Talgar, left Talgar, middle Talgar, right Talgar. Almaty, Kishi Almaty, Olkan Almaty, and Almaty River, which in consequence was called a passing river. Because there is a direct passage to Kyrgyzstan, it is the closest one, 70 kilometers. When tourism developed here, it was more active in the Kishi and Ulkan Almaty gorges in Soviet times than in some neighboring gorges. Therefore, after they gave the name to the river, I believe those tourists gave the name to the gorge too. In general, it is not uncommon when official and popular names of geographical objects or their interpretations are very different. For example, the mountains of Genghis Tao on the eastern outskirts of the Sari Arka. Many people think that they bear this name in honor of the conqueror Genghis Khan. In fact, the great commander was never there, and the name of the ridge initially sounded like Chigistau, that is, the Eastern Mountains, or the famous underground cave in the Turkestan region, which many pilgrims call the Ak Mosque. But geographically, this unique natural object has a different name, Jibek failure. These are vivid examples of the fact that the same place can have several names, official and popular.
До
Before the Russians came here, I know for sure that the passage gorge was called Ortasai, the Middle Gorge. What was the name of the big Almaty lake? Well, I suppose that it might be Ulkan Almaty Kor. Broadly speaking, only the name of the passing river was changed. It was called Ortasai and it became Passing River, so it remained. The name Ortasai means Middle Valley, but why was the river and gorge called Passing? The fact is that since ancient times, a direct path to the famous lake passed through this gorge.
Правильно, это проходная. Раньше здесь тропа есть.
Well, it is quite an accurate name. There is a direct path to Issyk-Kul. Because of this, they called it passing. We have two shortest ways to Issyk-Kul Lake. It is 72 kilometers from the large Almaty Lake to Issyk-Kul Lake, and from the upper Kul side to Issyk-Kul Lake, 40 kilometers. These are two of the most popular ways, even in the post-Soviet era. Do you remember when the first criminal events started in the mountains? Then the whole thing was closed thoroughly, finally, and irrevocably.
Основательно, окончательно и бесповоротно.
Возможно, что причиной этого стало...
Perhaps the reason for this was human activity, which affected the local wild animals, which, by the way, are in large numbers here.
Здесь очень много диких животных.
There are a lot of wild animals. A snow leopard can be seen here. There are many bears. Tien Shan brown bear, it is in the red list. There are wild boars, roe deer, red deer. We have a lot of animals here. A lot of wild animals. There are foxes and wolves.
Волк есть, лисицы есть.
Unfortunately, there are no archival data or some historical chronicles about how this route was laid. But experienced tourists know that it is this transition that was made along the most optimal route and can save a lot of time for a person who wants to get to the shore of Lake Issyk-Kul.
Даже если сейчас ходишь по горам, да?
Even if you are walking in the mountains now, there are a lot of goat paths. And those routes that were created in the pre-tourist era, they most likely were made by shepherds and pastors. And if there are any Zailiysky at the top, then here it is. Such routes were already trodden. Tourists just walked along them and went further.
Такие маршруты были уже протоптаны, туристы просто по ним проходили и уходили дальше.
Coming up next, why Passing Gorge began to be called Alma-Arasan.
Если открыть любой путеводитель по Алматинским горам, то в 9
If you open any guide to the Almaty Mountains, then in 9 out of 10 cases, this gorge will be called Alma-Arasan. No passing gorges, and moreover, Ortasai. But how did it happen that it was given such a name?
В этом ущелье проходном есть место, которое называется...
In this passing gorge, there is a place called Alma-Arasan. It is located 3 kilometers from the confluence of Passing River with large Almaty River, and it is called Alma-Arasan because there are warm radon and sulfur sources. Arasan means source, Alma means apple.
Арасан — это источник.
Well, we can say apple source. Maybe there were apple orchards.
Может быть, там были сады яблоневые.
Вообще слово «арасан», оно...
In general, the word Arasan, it comes from ancient Sanskrit. It sounds like Rasayana, and it means nectar in Sanskrit, so nectar or healing water. And from the Sanskrit language, it has passed into many languages, including Turkic and Kazakh. Alma means sour.
казахский. А алма означает кислое.
According to data that can be easily found on the internet in the world, there are no more than 300 radon sources, 30 of which are in the CIS. Since ancient times, people have noticed the healing effect of such water. The discoverers of bathing in radon sources are considered to be the Romans. So according to legends, when the Roman Empire expanded its borders, namely conquered the lands where modern Germany is located, the legionnaires received a strong rebuff from the local population. Washing themselves in the warm springs after another bloody battle, the Roman soldiers noticed that their wounds heal in no time. Over time, other people began to come to the sources for healing. As a consequence, much later a resort known throughout the world appeared on this site, Baden-Baden. In Kazakhstan in ancient times, warriors also healed their wounds at radon sources.
Есть такая легенда, что на этих источниках лечился сам Тамерлан.
There is such a legend that Amir Timur himself was treated at these sources. Stories about this area are found in the notes of Arab travelers, Chinese travelers, and the first thing mentioned in these records is healing sources.
В этих заметках, записях это целебные источники.
Radon water emerges from tectonic faults at a rate of about 1 liter per second. Its chemical composition has a huge content of sodium sulfate and is very close to the famous French waters of the Pyrenean type. The impact of radon water on the human body is so strong that bathing should be strictly limited in time. Otherwise, instead of a healing effect, you can earn problems.
Мужчинам особенно вред, последствия.
It is especially harmful for men. There may be side effects. While 20 minutes is not a problem, and then there is a weak concentration of radon, so it will not harm health. There are many tourists. Here we have a radon hot spring. The water temperature is 37 to 38 degrees. Well, this is good for the human body. This water is especially beneficial for women.
Особенно для женщин это полезная вода.
The Alma-Arasan tract is often the main goal of tourists coming to the gorge.
Оно расположено примерно 700
It
метров.
is located approximately 700 meters from the end of the road along the gorge entrance. There's a little walk, and there you can have a good time. You can swim. It is quite easy to get to a healing source. The path to it starts from a large parking lot where you can park your car. Further, the path goes up along the passing river. Just a few years ago, tourists themselves had to cross the turbulent current because the trail winds. And now several bridges have been put here, on which you can easily get from coast to coast. The whole journey will take approximately 20 to 30 minutes. In general, the place is very visited, even on a weekday. On the trail to the spring, you will find many tourists who came to swim in the healing water of the spring. But the gorge didn't receive the name Alma-Arasan from the sources themselves.
Есть такие сведения, что здесь насчитали в свое время 16 целебных.
There is such information that at one time 16 healing sources were counted here. And in 1931, in a large Almaty Gorge, a balneal sanatorium was built, which was named after the tract, Alma-Arasan.
Alma-Arasan появился тогда название.
The name Alma-Arasan appeared when they created the sanatorium there, because we have a lot of Arasans. We have Kopal Arasan, Arasan Khorasan. Wherever there are sources, they are also all called Arasans, everywhere the same.
Также здесь появился
So just the same way, Alma-Arasan and a large inscription on the map appeared here, and people when they went there to rest, they began to say we are in Alma-Arasan. And this name, it grew more and more. Closer to the city, people began to call all this area Alma-Arasan. That's how it all began. At first it was a wooden font without any frills. In the same year the first building was built, which accommodated 100 people. Later other buildings began to be erected, where Soviet tourists would live and be treated. Photos were preserved in the archive of the city of Almaty, the study of which shows that by 1938 there were at least 3 buildings in which the guests were accommodated. They put a gazebo for relaxing and enjoying the local beauties. The place became famous throughout the USSR. In Soviet times, there was a large all-union resort on these sources. It was open all year long. Sanatorium Alma-Arasan received guests from all over the Soviet Union until 1941. With the beginning of the World War II, they began to organize the work of evacuation hospitals everywhere in the Kazakh SSR. For the year alone, from 1941 to 1942, 11 evacuation hospitals were placed in the Republic, 8 of which were in Almaty and the region. The evacuation hospital located in the sanatorium of Alma-Arasan was listed on this list under number 4091. The total number of wounded that the institutions could take was 4,200 people.
Привозили со всех концов, со всех фронтов тяжело раненых бойцов.
Seriously wounded soldiers were brought from all fronts, evacuated doctors, the Odessa Ophthalmological Institute, the Kiev Medical Institute, and many others worked here. Due to the shortage of doctors, measures were taken to accelerate the training of medical personnel in universities of the Republic. As a result, by 1942, Kazakhstani hospitals were staffed with medical workers by 70%. University and high school students were sent there to help doctors. According to some data from archival documents, in the health resort of Alma-Arasan, 91% were cured and 78% out of 100% of the riot fighters went to the front again.
Работали первоклассные.
First-class, highly qualified specialists work here who literally brought back to life many seriously wounded soldiers, and their rehabilitation took place in the sanatorium Alma-Arasan. These are amazing, truly healing springs that come to the Earth's surface from diorite cracks.
Из трещин диорита.
Mainly in Almaty hospitals, including the one in the Alma-Arasan sanatorium, they sent fighters with injuries to the head, spine, eyes, and injured limbs, as well as those requiring prosthetics. Many soldiers were also diagnosed with tuberculosis. Healing water helped everyone.
Помогает при всех болезнях и при болезнях.
It cures all diseases, diseases of the organs of motion, joints, possible balneal diseases associated with colds. Many of them are cured with bathing. And we still know that when you go up this passing river, right to its end, you can find the source there. It flows from a pipe. People take baths there.
И доходите до конца, там есть прямо течет эта вода, источник, она из трубы, и там люди принимают ванны.
Был продуман и досуг для раненых.
The leisure for wounded soldiers was also thought out. Various artists and poets visited Almaty hospitals, including the sanatorium Alma-Arasan. A war correspondent and writer Konstantin Paustovsky, Yuri Smolich, visited Alma-Arasan. In particular, writer Yuri Smolich made a detailed description of the hospital and how the wounded were delivered to it. Here's how it was. The platform is 2 by 2 meters. Without any railing or other fence, only cables are attached to the corners. 4 cables converged over the platform into one knot, and from there another cable, the thickness of a ship's rope, stretched up. It was the most primitive elevator we ever saw, and we were invited to stand on it and climb up a few tens of meters.
На особом лифте поднимали раненых.
The wounded soldiers, food, medical staff, and much more were lifted on a special elevator. The sanatorium Alma-Arasan was located at an altitude of 2,000 meters above the sea level, and walking along mountains paths was difficult and not safe. According to the memoirs of Yuri Smolich, they were met by the head of the evacuation hospital. His last name was Zanuda. He ordered to accommodate guests. In the evening, Postovsky and Smolich spoke to the Red Army. Here's what Yuri Smolich wrote about that performance. In the hall, there were bedfasts, armless, legless people. But how eagerly they listened and with what joy they applauded whoever they could, with crutches or by stamping of feet, tapping a spoon on plywood, or by just shouting bravo or thank you. A sad, unforgettable evening. I'm glad that it was in my life. Unfortunately, the health resort Alma-Arasan has now become a part of history. Its territory belongs to a private person, and all that you can see climbing uphill is a fence.
После распада Союза эту территорию приватизировали, огородили большим забором.
After the collapse of the Union, this territory was privatized, closed with a large fence, and now people can't even walk through this gorge. But there is an untouched piece at the very channel of the passing river. In the past, there was a wild well where people came to swim. Coming up next, secrets of the Big Almaty Lake.
Отправляясь в другое ущелье, которое тоже называют.
Going to another gorge, which is also called Alma-Arasan, but in fact it is Ozernoye. We will come to another attraction, the Big Almaty Lake. This is a very popular place, although few visitors know its history. The length of the Big Almaty Lake exceeds 1.5 kilometers. Its width is about 1 kilometer, and its depth reaches 40 meters. The lake itself is located at an altitude of 2,511 meters above sea level.
Уже за большим Алматинским озером возвышается.
And behind the large Almaty Lake, 3 peaks rise. Savety, Big Almaty Peak, the most famous, which is visible from almost all parts of the city. The height of the Soviet's peak is 4,317 meters. The Big Almaty Peak is located just northwest of the peak Tourist, which is located closer to the reservoir. The height of the Tourist is 3,954 meters. From the southeast over the lake, there is Ozernoye Peak, 4,110 meters. Melting glaciers from these peaks are the main recharge of water in the lake. You can often hear people arguing about the origin of Big Almaty Lake. Some say that it is natural, others say that it was built by man. Surprisingly, both are right.
Большое Алматинское озеро, оно, естественно,
The Big Almaty Lake, it is a natural lake. It was formed more than 1,000 years ago when a huge landslide descended from the left slope. This is where the space station is now. Somewhere in that area, a huge landslide formed which blocked the river, shot up onto the opposite side for 200 meters, then turned down and went another 3 kilometers to the first hydropower station. So in the region of a large Almaty Lake, the entire gorge is littered with this large landslide. Its thickness is up to 200 meters.
так что в районе Большого Алматинского озера все ущелье завалено вот этим большим обвалом. Его толщина до 200 метров.
However, the final appearance of the Big Almaty Lake was made by people. The reason why it was modified was the lack of electricity in Almaty. So the Leningrad Institute Hydroelectric has developed several options for the deconstruction of hydropower plants on the rivers Big and Small Almaty. And Big Almaty Lake played an important role in this project.
Но оно было мелковатое, неглубокое. И когда возникла идея использовать его энергию,
It was quite shallow, and when the idea arose to use its energy, they started to build up this dam. They added about 12 meters to the height of the borders, but for safety reasons, the lake is not filled to the brim. Therefore, they added another 5 to 10 meters of artificial embankment.
5-10.
Therefore, in photographs of the 20s, it is in a slightly smaller size, but it certainly was there.
В несколько меньшем размере, но видно есть.
The project became relevant only at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War. Many factories and enterprises that needed electricity were evacuated to the capital of Soviet Kazakhstan. Japanese prisoners of war, prisoners convicted of minor crimes, military personnel, and ordinary citizens were involved in the construction of the dam. By the way, punishment cells remained below the gorge, where they sent Japanese prisoners of war who violated the regime of the labor camp.
Сейчас здесь сохранился лишь один барак-карцер, куда помещали провинившихся. Строительство дамбы вели вручную с минимальным количеством техники. Воздвижение.
Now I can see only one barracks cell where the delinquents were placed. Dam construction was carried out manually with a minimum amount of equipment. Exposure of the dam and hydroelectric power plant became stalled. This happened in the 50s, immediately after the war. Construction was mainly carried out by Japanese prisoners of war. As a result, a dam and the most outstanding creation, this famous pipe was built. It was originally made of wooden staves, like barrels. Then they replaced it with a metal one. The pitch of this pipe is 500 meters. It goes from the lake to the first hydroelectric power station, the largest hydroelectric power station in the Cascade. Then it goes along the slope of the mountain and comes out again down to the valley, to the area of the second hydroelectric power station, just where the passing river and the Big Almaty River confluence. And then a few more hydropower plants in the direction of the city. There are even points like the 8th hydroelectric power station. First, second, the 8th is the last one, if I'm right. But I don't know if they all work in order, but the first and second work for sure. At one point, they provided up to 25% of the city's electricity. That is, it was a great help. In 1953, the first high-mountain hydroelectric station, Ozornaya, was put into operation. By the way, this is the highest mountain hydroelectric power station in the entire post-Soviet space. Water flowed through the pipe into special hydraulic units and, due to the high pressure, turned the turbine blades, thereby generating electricity for the needs of the city.
И кроме того, по ней идет питьевая вода через эту трубу.
And besides, drinking water flows through this pipe, and our lake is filled in the summer, mainly with glacial waters. It is filled up to the brim, and during the winter, this water is used to generate electricity, and by spring, the lake drops by 10 meters. Therefore, if you come in the spring, this lake will seem very small to you, but by September, it looks much more impressive.
Это озеро вам покажется очень маленьким. Но к сентябрю оно выглядит гораздо более внушительно.
Now you can get to the Big Almaty Lake in two ways. The first is by road, the so-called serpentine. The second is to climb the pipe on foot. Nearby there are hiking trails. This path is shorter but more insidious. In the mountains it is very important to observe safety precautions. Experienced tourists are aware that even a small mistake can lead to tragic results.
Случаев на самом деле много, то, что происходит с людьми в горах. И со мной, с группами, да, с которыми я бегаю, тоже иногда.
In fact, accidents happen very often to the people in the mountains. I also have such experience. They are mainly associated with poor preparation, like with poor topographic preparation or the wrong study of timing, that is, the time that you make for the route, and when you don't know when you have to go back. When you don't observe this timing, when you don't observe the equipment, such things always happen, very strange things. Like when people are on the verge of death, being 500 meters from the road on which cars drive, or 800 meters from the forester's house, because they did not know about it. They didn't know those places well. Another danger that tourists face in the mountains is, of course, avalanches and mudflows. In Almaty region, there were several destructive mudflows that became history. In 1921, when literally the half of the city was washed away, in 1963 in Issyk, and in 1973 in the tract Meadow. During last mudflow, tragedy was avoided by means of round-the-clock rescue operations. Using this experience, in 1976 the construction of mudflow fortifications in the Big Almaty Gorge began, which were completed in 1980. The height of the structure is 40 meters. The length is 422. There's also a mudflow section, which in case of overfilling with mud, should dump the stream safely.
Выше Большого Алматинского озера находится космостан.
Above the Big Almaty Lake, there is a space station that observes space objects, and the received information goes to a single center, which is supervised by NASA Roscosmos. You can also get there, though you have to go through the border point. It is located just between the lake and the space station. Previously, one of the branches of the walking route to the Lake Issyk ran here.
Люди бегали эти 70 километров для хорошо подготовленного человека, даже в советское время бегали. Как мне рассказывали ребята, то есть трусы майки.
People ran these 70 kilometers for a well-trained person. Even in Soviet times, it wasn't such a big deal. Running shorts, sleeveless sports shirt, jam-stretched with water as a source of simple carbohydrates. And a person of average training can run those 70 kilometers for 11 to 12 hours. It isn't that hard. And people used to go there for like 1 to 2 days. They used to spend a night somewhere in the pass. The route was very popular. There were a lot of hiking trails of completely different categories. Even now, up above in the mountains, you can find some pile of stones or something that was left by tourists. For example, once we found a piece of paper in the can. It was written on it, a tourist group of a Novosibirsk name of their university crossed the Butakovsky Pass of some category and some date 1962. Like that. The Big Almaty Lake is part of the Zailiysky Alatau Park and is the closest mountain lake located near the city. On weekends and holidays, many tourists come to these gorges. However, many do not know that it is forbidden to make bonfires wherever they want. To do this, there are special equipped areas equipped with barbecue facilities and campfire sites. Also, many negligent tourists leave behind a huge amount of garbage. Experienced tourists always take several packages with them in order to remove the garbage left by others. The cleanliness in the gorges is also monitored by the workers of the national park, but as they admit, it is not always possible to keep up everywhere.
Сегодня, помимо того, что мы с вами побывали в живописных местах, мы узнали, как правильно называть.
Today, in addition to the fact that we have visited picturesque places, we learned the actual name of the gorge. So the Big Almaty Gorge starts from the Ozerny Pass and goes towards the city. Several gorges flow into it. Prohodnoye, Kosak, Kumbelsu, and Ozernya. Alma-Arasan is only a tract where radon sources are located, and this tract is located in the Prohodnoye Gorge. My name is Andrei Slozhin. You watched The Time Puzzle. See ya.